So we're really excited to have everyone join today for this virtual event celebrating the release of Darius the Great Deserves Better by Adib Khorram and hosted by Wild Rumpus Books for young readers. And I'm Kara. I'm really excited to have you all here tonight. We have the absolute treat of getting to listen to Adib in conversation with his friend and writing buddy, Lana Johnson. And I'll introduce them a little bit more in just a moment. But first, I wanted to make sure that we talked about a couple of logistics for our evening. And the first is that we just put in the chat a link to our website where you can order any of the 3 books by these 2 wonderful authors tonight. So you can just go ahead and click the link and it'll take you right to the website. And the second thing is that we will have time after Adib and Lana have their conversation to open it up to questions. And we would love it if everyone could put your questions in the Q&A box, which is separate from the chat box. Feel free to use the chat box as much as you want to. We want everyone to feel connected. But if you have a specific question you want Adib and Lana to answer, put it in the Q&A and we will be able to ask it on screen and have Adib and Lana answer a little bit later on. So I'm honored to introduce the 2 authors tonight. Adib Khorram lives in Kansas City, Missouri, and works as a graphic designer by day. And his debut novel, Darius the Great Is Not Okay, garnered much acclaim, too much to list, including the winning the William C. Morris Award. And Lana Johnson is a Minnesota-based writer working in wireless communication for a local youth shelter, and she is the author of Technically You Started It, which is a young adult novel that was released in 2019. You may see it way back on Adib's screen and Lana's screen. It's like an I Spy. So, and I caught wind that today is actually your friendiversary, is that correct? Well, I just wanted to say happy friendiversary and that we're really, really honored to have you here on such a special day. So I will open it up to the 2 of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes.
Thank you. Super excited to be here.
Right.
But it is our friendiversary.
It is. I can't, it's 6 years now.
It was 6 years ago today that you sent me your dystopian sicklet novel. And I sent you my Norse Gods in Iowa novel. and we've come a little bit of a ways from there.
We did. Well, as I recall, we tore each other's books to pieces and said, hey, we should be friends.
First, you tore my query to pieces, which was,
that's fair.
I was eternally grateful for, and I needed you to be friends with me for the rest of my life from there.
Right.
But you were also already famous at that point. Like now you're Adib Khorram, Morris Award-winning author. But then you were Adib Khorram, query shark.
Right.
And I had read your query before you had read mine.
Right. Oh my gosh. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar with what queries are, when you're seeking to be traditionally published, you usually need an agent. And so there's an agent named Janet Reed who runs a website called Query Shark, where she will basically analyze the emails you're sending to agents as queries to be represented. And one of mine got picked. The book never sold, and it's hiding in a trunk under my bed because, as Lana can tell you, and frequently will tell you if I'm around to hear her shading me, it was a hot mess.
It was
like The Fault in Our Stars meets The Hunger Games. Like, what could have possibly been more commercial and more of a garbage fire?
I did, however, want to read you my response to your novel.
Oh my gosh.
Not the whole thing, obviously, because that's just kind of silly. But no, I pulled out the very first piece, and I said these words to you 6 years ago. Okay, I have a confession to make. I am possibly the worst person in the world to have feedback on a slice of life story. So you're going to have to take everything I say with a grain of salt. If you're getting good feedback from folks that this is their cup of tea, throw everything I say completely out the window.
I forgot that it was kind of a slice of domestic life as well as being The Fault in Our Stars meets The Hunger Games.
But this Lana did not know she was going to write a slice of life novel.
Right? Oh my gosh. Oh, if
And
only
if you had
we
told
knew.
her, she would have called you a dirty liar.
Right. Oh, that's so hilarious. I think there's something really special about how we were able to be so painfully honest with each other and yet could tell just even over email that we're like, oh, this is the kind of person that I should be a friend to. I don't know. I think that's kind of the magic of making friends over the internet.
Well, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about your story is that you managed to keep an internet friend in it. So now we have to talk about Darius.
Oh crap! I was trying to segue into your book, which is also about digital friendships.
We both appreciate internet friendships, but we're going to talk
That's
about
fair.
you today.
Okay, if we must.
And I want to talk about Skype friendships.
Yes.
And how even when we were first friends, we didn't talk that much. So we eased into this. And now we do weird things like this. But what were you thinking? Did you have any kind of influence, like your internet friends? Did that change the way you would have written Darius and Sarab?
That's such an interesting question. It's kind of weird for me because, like, growing up, I came of age right when internet friends were becoming a thing. I had a 7-digit ICQ user ID, which for those unfamiliar was one of, I think, the first instant messaging platforms. And you literally just got a unique number and that was it. And I had a 7-digit and everyone else I knew had 8 digits. And I was like, oh, I'm so on board with this technology. I'm in like the first 9 million people to have it. I was literally like, I was like 1,300,000 something. So I felt very fancy when I found out how many people had other like higher numbers. But then I was also right around a time when internet relay chat was a big thing. And so me and my friends may have started a server and then started several servers and tried to make a network to rival some of the other big networks like Dalnet, which is getting super nerdy. But
I can beat that.
I know you can beat that. But I don't know how old or how nerdy many of the audience members are.
I used to log into friends' computers and do online role-playing games with them.
Which is fair. So, like, suffice to say, like, I've always been really comfortable with internet friendships, but video chat was not something that was feasible until I was much older. And video chat was something I actually only ever did with family because I still have family back in Iran. And it was actually really weird and interesting to try to mesh the kind of the intimacy that internet friendships can bring. And I think there's something powerful about when you're not in the same physical space, there's something that lets you be more vulnerable. And it's also weird because the internet's anonymity also brings out the worst in people sometimes. I mean, when you only look at 4chan or Twitter for that matter. But there are times when it brings out the best in you and lets you open up in ways that you can't if you're looking at another human's face. And there's this like really magical moment that happens when the friendship has become powerful enough offline that the friendship has become powerful enough text only that you become comfortable enough seeing the person's face. And it's kind of a singular moment in a friendship. And I feel like you and I crossed that back in 2017 when we met each other in person for the first time. And after that, it became much easier to talk on the phone or to talk over FaceTime or whatever. And so that kind of singularity is something that I've lived with in a number of friendships. And so when I was thinking about Darius and Sohrab and the way they would keep their close friendship alive after Darius went home from Iran back to Portland, I was thinking a lot that like in the end of the first book, they have started out emailing, but I very quickly realized that like as hard as the time difference is, because it's like basically half a day away, that once I figured it out that they would probably be the kind of people that Skype almost every day, or at least certainly every week, because that's the level that their friendship was at that point. And I think it's really interesting that I only ever like show my internet face to people that I'm like really close to. Whereas I let lots of people see my real life face. I think in some way it's like A, letting people into your home, but also B, letting people into your home when you haven't cleaned it and where you may in fact be wearing pajamas, which I may or may not be right now.
Well, and I also think there's this thing about like I can see myself. I can see all these things that I want to change, but I'm willing to get past that discomfort to talk to you.
Oh, that's such a big thing that I had not even thought about, is how we also are always seeing the tiny preview window of ourselves in a way that we never have to with real life communication.
You know, I always think about this stuff.
I know, right? This is why you're so smart. This is why we're friends. It's because I'm always learning from you.
But I do remember that moment where you sat down and I had to take this person in my head who knew all of my terrible words and all of my pizza parties with Odin stories and this nonsense that I put into words and all of these things we've shared back and forth, but now you're a physical human being with a whole bunch of tea.
I think, have a backpack full of tea when we met for the first time. I remember for the longest time you had like a cartoon avatar. And even though you literally looked exactly like your cartoon avatar, you were also three-dimensional and not like this tall.
I could be that tall. I
Right.
try really hard.
Yeah, right. But I was like, it was a moment of cognitive dissonance. So I was like, oh, that's absolutely Lana, but Lana's not 2 inches tall and flat. Like, what's going on? And my brain had to process it. And it was so, I don't know, it was a really exciting moment. And I'm really fascinated by the way that, technology has shaped the way I form friendships over my life and the way that it affects young people today who have always lived with this technology. So yeah, that I find it absolutely fascinating.
So I wonder this affection you have for technology that I also share. I wonder how that changes our approach to working and talking to youth, the teens that are reading our books. Like I don't know if you share this feeling, but I kind of feel a little bit out of place for being an older person who embraces technology and loves it and uses it to communicate and uses it to make friends. Is that something that you find helps you when you're writing your stories?
I think that for me, technology is, at its best, it's all about forming connections. And to me, its job is to help people connect with each other. And so I find it kind of liberating to learn about technology, to read articles about it, to embrace the aspects of it that I am able to understand and use them to connect with people. And at the same time, it's really like as I grow older, I feel myself becoming less flexible. I find myself becoming intimidated by things like TikTok or even Snapchat. I was like, what is Snapchat? Like I can barely manage a Twitter feed.
Can't do Snapchat.
Right. And it's so weird because growing up, I was a kid who always had to help my parents program the VCR. And now I'm the kind of person that's like, I don't like that. I don't want to install TikTok on my phone. I'm just going to look at the best TikToks on BuzzFeed. And so it's weird.
Probably safer for now.
Which is fair. I'm also a little wary of like I don't know what data collecting they might be doing. I'm always a little paranoid of spying, which I think comes from being Iranian American and always only half joking about the NSA wiretapping me. Hi, Craig. That's the NSA agent watching our book event tonight, secretly with the bug they've planted on my computer. I'm not paranoid. What are you talking about? Leave me alone. And it's so weird to write for teens and not be a teen anymore. But A, want to be able to speak to them as an equal, and then B, want to help share some of my understanding of the world with them, because things that are new to them are things that I have experienced in one way or another. And I feel like so much of writing is hoping to find common ground with your reader and remind them that human experience is both a beautiful spectrum and also intrinsically the same. And so I think about like the teens who used TikTok to coordinate sabotaging one of the Orange One's rallies in Tulsa, and the way like the BTS army, I guess it was the same rally, but the BTS army was also instrumental in sabotaging. It was like the BTS army in TikTok.
But they're also taking down Twitter tags, which go army.
Right, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, and every time I read about it, and the more I learn about it, the younger I feel, because we're all on the same internet, and unless you're on the dark web, I guess, in which case we're not on the same internet, but hopefully no one here is on the dark web. No judgment.
But,
a little bit of
the
judgment.
other thing, you literally used something from my teen years in Darius and something from your teen years. You did my teen years in Darius is the Great is Not Okay, and your teen years in Deserves Better, because I am in TNG. Like, I would come home from my job after school. I'd go to work, and after work I'd come home, and my parents would have recorded TNG for me on the VCR.
Right.
But that connection, like how you exploited that connection for intergenerational change, and I want you to talk to me about my nerdery.
Ooh, I think there's something so powerful about nerdiness and fandom, and the very unique love that I think we are able to give things that we are discovering when we're teenagers, in a way that I think is much less common in adults. I don't think it's impossible to find it as an adult, but I find it happening a lot less now that I'm an adult. I think
it's harder not to be jaded.
Right. I think the last thing that brought me pure unbridled joy and that I became obsessed with and completely knowledgeable about was probably Yuri on Ice from 2016, which is why I'm still figure skating to this day.
I can attest that you did.
Right. But I think when you're a teenager and you're like getting exposed to different kinds of story for the first time, you're experiencing a lot of emotions for the first time, those experiences are really powerful. And I think I want to say I read an article, and I wish I could remember where, about how once you hit about 30 years old, you kind of stop liking new things for the most part and start rewatching all the shows you used to like growing up. You start listening to all the music you liked growing up, and it becomes just a lot harder for you to find new things. And
I think it's a trap you can fall into. I don't think you have to fall into that. As
right.
I know exactly what BTS is and why.
Yeah. But I read that article around the same time I was writing my very first draft of Darius the Great is Not Okay, which was back in 2015. And as I was writing, I had this like really sobering realization that I was closer in age to Darius's dad than I was to Darius himself. And I like had to lay down on the floor for a moment to process the way that time was passing, and that, you know, I had truly become an adult. But I was thinking about how even when we're adults, we pass on the things we love to those that are younger than us. And so I was really excited to give my love of Star Trek to Steven, Darius's dad, and then have Steven share it with his son. Especially because their relationship was so fraught in the first book. It felt really joyful to give them something to connect with, especially something as fun and nerdy as Star Trek.
And then Star Trek gave you the gift of new Star Trek.
And then, oh my gosh, right? I could never have predicted when I was drafting the book that suddenly there was going to be a bunch of new Star Trek shows right around when it came out. And now we're getting Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Prodigy, Strange New Worlds, and Section 31, and who knows what else might be on the horizon. I'm not that excited about the Quentin Tarantino film, possibly, to be honest. And it's not that I object to people saying the F word in Star Trek, obviously, because they do it in both Discovery and Picard to great effect. But I just don't I don't want Quentin Tarantino to make Star Trek.
It's definitely a choice.
It is a choice.
It's a choice.
It's the kind of choice that you're like, do they just have a wheel that they spin and like see what director comes up and be like, we should hand the reins of the franchise to this person? In which case, why didn't the wheel come up with Ava DuVernay, who I think is much more better.
That would have been amazing.
I bet she would do amazing things with Star Trek.
That would be amazing.
Right?
Let's see if we can make that happen. We should both write it into our books.
Viacom, if you're listening right now, tap Ava DuVernay for the next Star Trek. Okay, I don't know if Viacom is listening, but
I don't know. But Michelle might be somewhere out there.
Right. Fingers crossed.
Okay, so another thing that we didn't quite have when we were teenagers that we're both putting into our books is some of the identities and the inclusivity of those spaces, which while Star Trek professed inclusivity, it didn't have, even TNG didn't have that whole welcomingness for all identities. And so I know that you were very intentional about putting a welcoming space in for Darius into this book. And how did you come about that when, again, not something that we grew up with when we were the teens?
The more I write, and I say this as if I've been writing for a long time, and like I had published 10 books.
6 years is a long time.
6 years is a long time, and 2 books is much more than 0 books. And it's sometimes weird the way that I feel both like very old and also very young in this industry. And it might be because every Tuesday more books come out and then you become 80 years old instantly. But I've been thinking a lot, I guess probably this calendar year in particular, as the world has become so terrible around us, about how I feel like a writer exists in the space between showing the world as it is and imagining a world that could be. And so in particular, when it came to Darius's queerness, I desperately wanted to show the world as it could be. And my day job when I'm not a writer was for an event production company in Kansas City that did like concerts and conferences and all kinds of stuff back when back when you can have gatherings of 50 to 20,000 people.
The days.
Right. And one of the conferences we had done several times and that I worked was a conference for high school soccer coaches. And it was really interesting to sit in on the sessions they were doing, because sometimes it was about, how do you like implement good footwork skills? They had like a whole soccer field set up indoors where people could like practice drills. But then there were also discussions about how do you make your players love the game of soccer instead of winning? How do you make them just value teamwork? How do you make inclusive and safe spaces for all of your players? How do you affirm players that may be going through tough situations at home? How do you make sure queer players know that you will support them as their coach? How do you handle kids going through questions about their gender identity or transitioning athletes, and how do you affirm them while state law may in fact just categorize things one way, while you seeing them as your student athlete want to affirm them in every way possible? And it really struck me seeing adults grapple with these questions, because like when I was a teenager, I could never imagine a teacher, much less a coach for a team, being like, how do I make sure that my team isn't a cesspool of toxic masculinity? And so it's so weird, because I think we have so far to go. And in many ways, these are just ideas that are being talked about and not practices that are being implemented. But I really wanted to explore what it could be like if someone took all these ideas about making inclusive spaces and managed to make them work. And that's something I really wanted for Darius, because it's something I wish I could give to every young person. And so in a way, it was like that was the fantastical speculative element in some ways that I introduced this book is, what if it was a world where there were coaches that could make inclusive spaces like this? And I feel like I ended up rambling a great deal. But it basically all just comes back down to be gay and do crimes, really.
But what I hear you saying is that it's on us to be the adults that learn and grow and make spaces for people to show other adults that they can learn and grow and make spaces for people.
Oh my gosh, that's so smart. This is why we're friends. There's also a centipede crawling on my wall, like right out of the corner of my eye, and I hate centipedes a great deal. But I'm gonna be a professional and make it through this panel, and then I'm gonna squash it.
I was washing my hands like all people should be doing right now, and there was a piece of parsley on the faucet, and I thought it was a spider, and I screamed. So
I did have a spider inside yesterday. It's so funny because I saw a spider outside my living room window making a web, and I was like, "Oh, good job, spider! Make sure and catch all the bugs." And then I'm pretty sure that exact same spider found a way into the house, and then I was like, "No, I'm sorry, spider, you must go now. This is my space."
The spider can take care of the centipedes. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's probably why I have centipede now, is because I squashed the spider yesterday.
Exactly. You should save those spiders.
It was big and brown, and I get nervous because we have brown recluses around here.
That's fair.
And I just don't take risks on that front. Like, if they're outside, I will leave them alone to their own business.
Gray's okay.
Right. But yeah.
Brown.
Anyway,
Okay.
Anyway, sorry. I'm gonna just not look at it.
That's hard to do. Yeah, maybe we should do questions now.
Oh my gosh, I love questions.
Completely derailed.
Instead of just me staring at this bug climbing up my wall. Oh, now it just fell. That's exciting.
Oh, well, that's fine. Now it doesn't exist anymore.
Now it's just on the floor, which is really exciting. So now I'm holding my feet in the air. Anyway, yes, questions. I think Kara's going to join us again to help us manage questions, because clearly we're not high-functioning adults right now.
We are chaos.
I love the chaos. It's brilliant chaos. That's all I can say. Well, we do have a few questions so far, but anyone can keep entering questions into the chat box as we go. So first question is for you, Adib, which is Rose City Teas based off a real place or just a really great dream?
Rose City Teas is actually very much based off of a tea shop in Portland called Stephen Smith Tea Makers, which is one of my favorite places to visit in Portland, and is also where Darius's dad got his name, Stephen, but I do spell it differently. But it's this cute little like hole in the wall. It was, and now they've expanded to several more locations. But when I first discovered them, they were like a hole in the wall, and just with like the most fun tea and a really friendly staff. And I just have always loved it.
That sounds wonderful.
It's so good. Smithtea.com. They also make actual delicious tea.
Ooh. And do you have a favorite tea from them? I know you probably, that's a hard question to answer.
I have many favorite teas, but the tea I most like to pair with my book is they make a Rose City Genmaicha, and Genmaicha is a Japanese green tea with popped rice in it, but their blend also has rose petals in it, and so it's this really fascinating kind of blend of different tea making cultures, and I think that really kind of sums up Darius's life in a way.
Beautiful.
Oh, it started climbing again. Sorry. This is good though. That means it's not hidden anymore. I can identify it. And
I'll pepper you with questions to distract you.
Thank you. Please do. I just find centipedes terrifying.
They're pretty scary. So, okay, this is a question for both of you. Have you always been drawn to writing contemporary YA, or have you tried writing fantasy or sci-fi?
Oh my gosh.
I was going to be a fantasy author. I still am one day. I want to write that trash fantasy that has no value in humanity at all, except for it's fun.
I think you would have a really hard time doing that, because I feel like you always end up having a core of a story you want to tell and a question that you're always exploring in some way. Even as you try to make it trashy, I think you have too much heart to succeed.
I can try though.
you try really hard sometimes.
Made people fall in love with a clown one time.
Lana did in fact once write a fantasy which I got to critique, about a floating circus in the sky that travels from floating city to floating city, and the romantic interest was one of the clowns in the circus. And everyone's like, I hate clowns. By the time, when they started, they're always like, I hate clowns, I hate clowns. And by the end, they're like, oh, I was really shipping this clown with the main character. What have you done to me? And I think it's that way of holding disparate ideas in your story and managing to make them into something new that makes your stories yours. But as far as me, it's weird. I never imagined myself like being constrained by a particular genre. The very first book I remember sitting down writing as an adult was like a steampunk alternate Greek fantasy setting. That's of course
a lot into our early stories.
That's if you don't count any of the like self-insert Star Trek fan fiction I wrote in middle school and high school.
Jane Eyre.
Like I dabbled in fantasy, like I don't know if you could call it secondary world fantasy since it was kind of our world, but there was in fact magic in it. But I wrote that. I wrote a dystopian, which went nowhere. I wrote a sci-fi once that I just didn't have the skill set for. I once tried to write a mystery, which I had even less of the skill set for because I always write by the seat of my pants and make up as I go. And turns out if you write a mystery, you kind of have to plan who did what.
Agatha Christie didn't. Agatha Christie just made it so everybody was equally bad, and then she picked somebody at the end.
That's fair. And I still do not think I have that skill set. And then contemporary is just the book that I happened to be writing when I wrote Darius. And that is the one that ended up selling. And I think maybe it was just a confluence of like timing and idea and the We Need Diverse Books movement really gaining steam. Maybe it was just kind of fate. I don't know, but that's kind of where I landed. And I feel really good about that space for now, but I also am always eager to push myself and try new things.
You have so much heart that you fit so nicely into contemporary.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just a goof off.
That's not true. You're a nerd, a gorgeous, beautiful nerd.
Well, okay, I have another question running off of that, which is, could you speak to the process of creating a sequel to a book that wasn't necessarily initially written as part of a series?
Ooh, yes. So when I wrote Darius the Great is Not Okay, I always meant for it to be a standalone. But it helped me as like a writer to imagine where Darius's life was going to continue after the book, because I feel like all of my favorite books were the ones that gave you a sense that life was not over, that the story was over, but life was going to go on. And so I had to kind of invent that for myself as I was writing the end. And then after that, I wrote a whole other book, and it was terrible. And I had a phone call with my agent, and she's like, "How honest do you want me to be?" And I was like, "Please be honest with me. I'm a theater kid and I can handle criticism." And we had a really good conversation about how we both really liked the characters, and wouldn't it be great if there was a plot for them? And I was like, I thought maybe you would tell me what the plot was. And she's like, "I'm sorry, I don't see it anywhere. If I found it, I would let you know." And so we decided that was like not the best follow-up to have. And so I set it aside and started working on a sequel to Darius, because it had started to kind of get some attention and some people had kind of wanted one. And Molly asked like, what would a sequel be like? And I rattled off a pitch, and she was like, "Oh, that actually sounds like maybe that's the book you need to write, because it sounds like there are questions you want to answer through Darius." And so the process of coming back to it was, on the one hand, very structured, because I already had all these characters created, and I like had to like make an outline for it and everything. And I had never outlined a book properly before. And I don't know if that you could call what I did proper, but it was like a whole page of outline. And so it was a very structured approach, but it was also very joyful in the way of like, if you have like a favorite pair of shoes that are really comfy, it felt like putting those comfy shoes back on. to get back into Darius's head. And in that way, it was kind of one of the easiest books I've ever written. And I wish I could bottle that feeling up, because it was so good to just like love what I'm writing and also feel that I'm writing it well. Because usually I'm like, I hate this, I hate what I'm doing, I'm a terrible writer and I'm a terrible human being and no one will ever love me. That's kind of my usual creative mindset. Like, that's just what it's like sometimes. Sorry, so I'm rambling, but yeah, it was a really beautiful and joyful experience.
That's really beautiful. Okay, let's see. We have a lot of questions, so we might not be able to get to all of them, but I'll keep rattling them off. Okay, so for both of you, can you speak about the process of choosing and representing the sexuality of your main characters?
Ooh. Do you want me to go first, Lana, or do you want
Okay,
to?
you can go first.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a gay man, and I feel like, on the one hand, it's important to represent queer people on the page, and on the other hand, I always reject the notion that we are like required to perform our identities for our art. But that being said, very early on, while I was revising the first Darius book, I had this kind of epiphany of, oh, I think he might be gay. The story is still not a love story. This is still a story about friendship, but I think maybe in the back of his mind, he's thinking that he's gay and is probably going to come out at some point. And so when it came time to write the sequel, I was like, oh, well, clearly he should already be out and have a boyfriend, because that's what is interesting to me. I always feel like coming out stories are important, and especially coming out stories featuring queer people of color are important. But I'm the kind of person that's a little bit contrarian, and I'm like, well, there are all these coming out stories in the market. I want to know what happens after you come out and how you navigate relationships. And also, like, you're always coming out, always. Every time you meet someone new, you're coming out. I was like, well, what if you had already dealt with like the big coming out? Like, what does it look like when you're comfortable, but still always a little bit on guard? And that's kind of where I landed with that. And that's just and so for Darius, it was very easy to make him be gay because I am gay. But for his boyfriend, Landon, I was actually thinking a lot about kind of my experiences dating, and there's a weird wariness that I've experienced in my queer community with the way that gay men and bisexual men relate. And I wanted to deconstruct that a little bit. And so Landon is bisexual, and actually one of Darius's grandmothers, I guess both of Darius's grandmothers are bisexual as well. And I wanted to, I guess, do my part to try to unpack and dismantle biphobia in gay spaces, and particularly gay men who, in my experience, are sometimes wary of bisexual men because they're like, oh, well, you could always like go be with a woman if you wanted. And I feel like that's terribly reductive and pretty bigoted. And so I wanted to just show a better version of that relationship. And so I was thinking heavily about that, and, validating queer kids. And at the same time, I also feel like I'm a very organic writer, and sometimes I literally just go where the characters and the story take me, and I'm sure something subconscious is happening, but I don't always know. Yes, I feel like I should stop rambling now. Sorry. It's really weird. It's really weird doing these in Zoom because you can't see when you're putting people to sleep.
You never put people to sleep.
I know, right? Someone in the front row yawns and you're like, oh, I've got to wrap this question up.
That's their problem, not yours. I actually, I never intended to write Technically You Started It. It was kind of an accident. And I never meant to make Haley demisexual because I didn't quite know I was yet. that was something that I was learning along the way. So it became my own exploration in the story. And I didn't want, it took me a very long time to put the words on the page. Thank you, Linda. Technically, it was an accident. Yeah. But it became, as I was writing the story, I was writing it as text messages, and text messages is a hard thing to write, and I'm never going to do it entirely text messages again, but like I also really love it, and it's really easy, so I'm always going to have some probably. But Haley's story became the main focus because it was text messages, and it became this representation of being what it's like to fall in love with somebody when you're demisexual and demi-romantic, because it had nothing to do with what Martin looked like, and it had nothing to do with their physical interaction. There was no like magical chemistry when they were in the room together. There were no sparks flying. It was the slow connection that became something that was not the kind of connection you necessarily have with a friend. Like, being demisexual doesn't mean I'm attracted to Adib. that would just be weird. And so exploring those,
that would be very complicated.
And also I wanted her to have someone that understood it in a way that other people didn't. And Martin being bisexual kind of helped with that, because being attracted to people just because of your sexuality isn't a thing. Like, there's more to it than I am attracted to females. I'm attracted to males. It's like, I'm attracted to people that are like this or do these kinds of things. And so having him have not necessarily a allo cis het straight mentality about sexuality made it a lot easier for her to relate to him than to people that hadn't interrogated that yet. And I think the interrogation that we all go through when we're starting to explore our identities really helps us understand other people better if we want to. Sometimes we just go internal, and that's okay, but please go external at some point. But I think there is this important part of I really liked the fact that I could understand Martin being bisexual and understand his demi-romantic relationship with men, whereas more an allo relationship with women, and work those two pieces together as both a connection to Haley and his own, wouldn't necessarily normally be attracted to Haley, but he starts to see her in a different kind of light, and they have a different kind of developing relationship. So I think their sexuality not only informed the story, it's what made the story work in a way without it being like the plot. They were coming out, but they were coming out to each other, and everybody else didn't matter. They were exploring their identity and what that meant to be who they were, but it wasn't one of those stories that like they learned anything about themselves from it. I hate stories where people learn things about themselves. My next book is a character who has migraines, and she learns nothing from it. She just has migraines. Right. And so I feel very lucky to be able to write these stories where they have these sexualities they can identify and deal with that, but then also like it's not dealing with it, it's just being a teenager. And that's really what it is. It's just being a teenager. And a 30-something who, 40-something, who takes the time to learn more than like not just stop and decide they know everything about themselves. So.
Right. I think there's also something really powerful that happens when queer people come into other queer people's orbits, and that there's a very gradual lowering of guard, and we open ourselves up to each other in ways that I don't think we often do if we know or perceive the other party to be completely allo cishet. And, you know, granted that trust is not always earned, and, you know, there are certainly lots of trash queer people out there as well. I've certainly dated my share, but there is a feeling of, well, there are at least some ways in which this person is safe for me. And I think
They get something.
especially when you're a teenager, feeling any sort of safety with someone else is kind of a big deal. Sorry, that got really like deep.
That was wonderful. Thank you
That's
so
what
much
we do.
for answering that question. That was beautiful. So the next question I thought we could talk about is also related to relationships, but this one is more specifically about relationships and age, which you kind of talked about earlier, but I figured I'd ask more precisely. So especially in this question is in regards to your Darius the Great is Not Okay, but I figure we should talk about both books. So you do such a great job of balancing how adults and especially family are a really important part of a teen's life, and as well as school and friends and peers. And so could you talk a little bit about weaving together those parts of Darius's life?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I feel like when I was working on the Darius, a lot of the YA I was reading at the time, which was popular, was YA with dead parents or absent parents or uninterested parents. And I know that that is the reality for many kids, but it wasn't the reality for me, and it also was not the reality for anyone in my peer group. And I don't know, and especially as an Iranian American, and I think most diaspora families, the idea of an absent parent is just like completely foreign, and a disinterested one even more so. And so I really wanted to just, I guess, like kind of honestly portray what it was like for me growing up with parents that both had jobs and yet still made time to know what was going on with me. Sometimes didn't understand me and sometimes got into fights with me, but we're still around. And so also coming back to that feeling that I had when I was like, oh, I'm closer in age to Stephen than I am to Darius. I also became more aware of like what I would want to say to a young person what I would want to say to a child if I had a child. And maybe that made me pay more attention to what Darius's parents were doing and what they were thinking, and helped bring them to life as characters more. I hope that answered the question. I feel like maybe I lost the thread.
I think that was great, especially since you had already kind of talked about differences in age and relationships in that way.
And laying on the floor, pondering the passage of time. A very important part of my process is lying on the floor for one reason or another.
So dovetailing off of that, someone mentioned that they love the growth in Darius and Layla's relationship. Is that the pronunciation of Darius?
Lale.
Lale. Throughout this book. And so was this originally a part of the book, or did it grow more prominently as you were writing?
Oh, I think it would. Their relationship changed a lot between like my first version of the first book and the final version of the first book. In that my editor, really made me think a lot more about what their relationship would be like. And so when it came time to write the second book, I had already spent a lot more time deepening that relationship, and I was really interested to see where it was going to go, especially as Lale is becoming more of her own person. And I feel like whenever I'm around, I have a bunch of cousins that are all in that elementary school age right now, and I feel like every time I see them, it's kind of amazing to see that they're becoming more and more of little humans. I mean, granted, they're always little humans, but like to see personalities like cementing, to see them start to grasp things like the permanence of time, the passage of time and the permanence of objects and the fleetingness of moments. And so it was really fun to have Darius kind of seeing that in his sister, and also to see have him see his sister going through the same things he did with as regards to bullying and racism, and have that kind of be an incubator for his activism and advocacy. But I think, when you're a teenager, you don't always have all the tools that we as adults have, and so he also is like learning by doing and sometimes not getting it right. And I think it can be really hard when you love someone and want to do everything right by them and come up short. And I really wanted to explore that with Darius and Lale.
That's great. I think we'll just do 2 more questions if that's all right.
The final 2.
Ah. So the first one is that someone commented that they loved the scenes involving Darius and the soccer team. And so how much research or investigating went into thinking about all those sports aspects of this book?
Ooh, research-wise, it was a lot of watching MLS games on like in the background as I was working, or sometimes if it was like a really good game, sitting down and actually watching it. Reading a lot of articles about it, and like I did play soccer when I was really young, but I was terrible at it. And then some part of it was just me kind of guessing, to be honest. And then checking with people who actually did know more about soccer than me. Like one of the people that helped me look at my soccer scenes in particular was Julian Winters, who's author of Running with Lions and How to Be Rumby Cameron and the forthcoming Summer of Everything. But Running with Lions was about a soccer team, particularly a queer inclusive soccer team that definitely influenced the expression of Darius's queer inclusive soccer team. And so I was like, Julian, is this how soccer is played? And so that was an important part of the research process too.
That's really cool. I didn't know about that. Okay, so as our last question, I saved this to the very end because it totally takes us back to the beginning of our conversation about
full circle.
Technology. Can you talk about creating the world of Darius on Animal Crossing? Someone said they visited and thought it was awesome.
Oh, excellent. For sure. So I have been playing Animal Crossing, I guess, since I got it for my birthday this past April at kind of the height of the quarantines. And me and my friends loved visiting each other. And I found this website that you could upload an image and it would basically convert it into an Animal Crossing pattern that you could then use your phones to like scan the pattern and get a QR code for it. And then, no, sorry. You use your phone to scan the QR code, and then you could link your phone to your Nintendo account and upload the pattern onto your Switch. It was like a 5-step process. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. I bet I could make a book cover. But at the time, the way Animal Crossing was set up was that like you had to sit at your Switch and let people onto your island, and like people can do all sorts of damage to your island if they want it to be really malicious. And that made me a little wary. And then about a month ago, Nintendo put out this update that lets you kind of upload a static image of your island to the cloud as a dream that people can visit. And they can do whatever they want there, but it has no effect on reality. And then I got thinking, oh, then I could like let anyone come and like I wouldn't have to leave my Switch on. I wouldn't have to like do anything to monitor it. People could just come and go as they please. And so then I got to thinking about putting the book cover down. And then I was like, oh, I should like recreate some of the scenes or something too. And so I'm in a Slack of Animal Crossing players. And I was like, hey, does anyone have like this, and this item that I can come and catalog to help make myself a tea shop, or items to make like a little homecoming dance scene. And so yeah, it just kind of came together over the course of about a week as I got the patterns uploaded and then like collected all the items I needed to set out. And it's been a lot of fun. Especially, I read an article recently that talks about how like talking on the phone with someone is like face-to-face interaction, and like going to the zoo with someone or walking around with someone is side-by-side interaction, and humans need both to develop good relationships. and like visiting people's islands in Animal Crossing is an example of side-by-side interaction and not face-to-face interaction, and like how much it has done to buoy people's mental health in the quarantines. And I thought that was so cool. So I just wanted to get in on that fun.
Also, never not extra.
Never. Also true, I'm never not extra. Sometimes alarmingly so.
Either we're both always extra, and that's why we're good friends.
Exactly.
I love that. That's really fun. Well, it was such a joy to have the both of you join us tonight. We're really glad that you could join us on your tour, your virtual tour.
Thank you to you and to the whole team at the Wild Rumpus for hosting us. I loved getting to visit your store last year for Lana's launch. I'm still really alarmed by Neil deGrasse Tyson, the chicken.
deGrasse Tyson, the black chicken.
The black chicken, who I swore
tells
to God,
everybody about
I
her.
swore it was a cat. It was black and fluffy, and then it stood up, and I was like, "Oh, you're a chicken."
Well, and she even looks like our other cat, which, if you remember, maybe that it sadly partially destroyed some of the beautiful cookies we had. Thankfully, there were enough left for everyone, but the cat that
the cat with yes. So I
That's what they gotta do.
truly appreciate you hosting us. This has been such a delight.
Thank you.
Any excuse that Lana and I have to hang out is always a good excuse.
Thank you so much.
And everyone can remember to order the books through our website. We've gotten a lot of great messages of everyone saying thank you for tonight.
Yes, thank you to all our attendees for coming. And I hope you all stay safe out in the quarantines and be gay and do crimes.
Good night, everyone.
Good night and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.